Right.
So today, welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to focus on the big news, the interest rate drop. So the best way to introduce you to guys, what the whole news is about, what is the update, how it's going to reflect the market for the Bay Area. Today, we actually have the honor to invite my favorite lender, one of my favorite lender, Joseph Polizzi.
How are you? You're making me
Welcome.
blush. You're making me blush right now.
So,
Thank you
Joseph,
for the.
tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I from the Bay Area, from San Francisco. I went to school on the East Coast. Was an options trader when I came out. I graduated from Boston College. Came out, and a friend of mine had a mortgage company, and I would assist him. So I would trade options from 5:30 in the morning to about 1 in the afternoon. Then I would go to the East Bay where his mortgage company was and learn that space. Eventually, my candle was burnt on both ends. I migrated to the mortgage space, of which I've been in almost 30 years. So, um,
30 years. I think our
yeah,
audience is going to really appreciate what you're going to share with us today.
yeah, I've certainly been through cycles, that's for sure.
So, affordability shock for a lot of buyer, right?
Right.
That we want to also talk about today. Um, how the housing market responds is another thing that I want to talk about today. That brings the how does it impact the impact on buyers.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I
we
think,
actually prepare.
go ahead, go ahead.
So we actually prepare something today that we do want to bring it to our audience, right? Knowing that from the record low to 20-year high, all the numbers that can you walk us through it really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you saw on the affordability slide, that you had mortgage payments essentially almost go up 3 times, right? And again, if you're in the market now, you weren't. If you weren't in the market then, it doesn't really have any relevance. All of a sudden, you have a lot of people competing to buy. If you were fortunate enough to have parental help, or you were fortunate enough to be in a company that went public or that you had some stock and so forth, you had leverage on the affordability side that other people didn't. So, I mean, if you look at home ownership for people under 35, the percentage was very low. I think 37% or so. That again, I think it has to be a psychological change as well, where people are like, hey, I've got a chance to have my offer accepted. It was very strange because I think on the affordability side, you went from 2020, 21, 22, where people were just throwing whatever offer in and getting it accepted. So those buyers just got outpriced. And then when rates went up, even if they were willing, they were outpriced by terms, so to say. So they lost a lot to cash or massive amounts of down payment where they were trying to do, if you were an FHA buyer the last 2 years, and the ratios started to tick, your qualifying started to tick up, so your ability to buy, came down, so your affordability came down, and you were still losing out. That's like, it's depressing. You get to a point where you give up. I think I see that psychology shifting to where, I have offers that, that are accepted with seller credits. I mean, when's the last time we saw that? Maybe you did that. I think last time I did it, but but that's a rarity, right? And I'm feeling that change now.
So let's have you help us a little bit from the record and
Okay.
to this 20 years.
Well, let's look at the affordability shock, because I think that's the first thing that's been what has shocked everything, right? I mean, it's put us in paralysis in some manner. But a $400,000 loan at 2 5/8 was $1,612 a month. When we hit our high that went up to almost $3,000 a month, about $2,900 a month. So again, when you're looking at buying something and you look, let's say you got pre-approved in 2021, you lost out on a couple offers, this thing ran away. It was a wildfire, right? And it ran away from you. When we go down and say now, that's down about $2,400 a month. So that's a significant lowering, with the hope again that there's two more rate cuts that have an effect on mortgage rates. When rates start to go down, as you see, someone could say, okay, I'm still able to sell my house at a high price, because remember, they remain stable. I'm still able to sell at a high price, and now I'm getting some rate relief, so I'm a little more willing to sell. And again, the report today came that sellers were high. The number of sellers were higher than buyers for the first time in 8 years. That number had increased, so that's a point in the right direction. Okay. But what I found astounding as I was doing this and looking through it, and I know what our numbers as an industry are, but home ownership rate to 65% in 2025. That's a low, right? Under 35, ownership fell to 37%. And again, I think that psychology, much like the stock market moves through, is what we call momentum play and so forth, that you need to have that change. You need to have some sort of a joy of home ownership again, not like, oh my God, my payment's this, right? And I think when you have conversations about rates lowering, you do have an impetus and a feeling like things are going to improve in terms of my payment. I'm comfortable with my payment now, because now, it's $500 a month less, say, and I'm able maybe now to get a seller credit to help with my costs. And knowing that you're able to take advantage if rates do fall, and again, if rates do fall, many in my industry make a terrible mistake of saying like, oh, we'll do this, we'll do an adjustable rate mortgage, and then we'll just refi when rates go down. Well, you don't know when rates are going to go down, right? Refinancing is an opportunity. But again, that conversation of, we may be able to refi, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I don't see this, there's no end in sight, right? But that's kind of where I thought, the most important thing is that first and second time home buyer, and really the retired home buyer that's finally able to go like, I'm going to do this now, because, I'm finally able to find some relief. If I have to take a $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 loan, those people are now calling us and saying like, hey, what would my payment, I mean, we have 3 this week. What would my payment be if? Those were conversations that weren't happening the last 3 years, which means if you're a first time buyer or a buyer looking to get in the market, move up or whatever, there is finally some cracking of the ice, so to say.
Good. Right. Thanks for sharing. So one of the things for a lot of first-time home buyer and buyers on the market, that they also want to know that what will my closing costs be? Can you kind of help us a little bit of allowing the audience to understand, are they part of my loan, or will I pay in cash at closing? Those are really, really simple question that we get a lot of audience is asking about the closing cost. Can you walk us really quickly through that?
For sure. Yeah. So that's actually a very good question, because it's the biggest mistake people make, because they think, oh, I got my 20% down and I'm ready to go. And, there's down payment, and then there's cash to close, and cash to close is inclusive of closing costs. I usually say in the Bay Area, it's about 1.5% to 2% of your purchase price, but there's variations, right? Certain counties have transfer taxes that are more expensive than other counties. So that's something that we want to be aware of up front. The second part of closing costs is impound counts. So generally, when you have 10% or less, you're required to have what's called an impound account or an escrow account, where you pay your taxes and insurance monthly. Seems like a reasonable thing, and many people opt for it. However, depending on when you close, that impound account adds to your closing costs because you may be paying 9 months of taxes up front, depending on the close date. So that has a big variation on your closing. When you go out to show the house, is there a potential to get a credit for closing costs? That's part of what when we do our homework, when we get to the exam of finding a house, we know what we're dealing with. We're prepared, right? The lack of preparation is what shocks people, as you know, because you probably have dealt with that part of it, right? So going in, and that's why I think on our end, transparency is always so important, so that up front, 3 days before close, there's not a surprise like, where did this come from? I've never had that occurrence, because even prior to the new regulations, which beat it in a consumer, like, here it is, here it is, here it is, we were always like, prepare for this, so that there's going to be no change. I think one of the things as well that's a big variable that has changed in specific areas of California would be hazard insurance or fire insurance, right? So if you happen to be in an area that is a fire zone, that could add to your closing costs. So I think, we've had a few deals fall out because the fire insurance premium had come back, or the hazard insurance premium, whatever you want to call it, homeowners insurance, all the same, had come back astronomically high. So that's something that, the initial preparation of when you're looking, and better than I, but that's part of what we look at. Because we've had a few instances where we've been on the cusp of qualifying ratio wise, and then all of a sudden the hazard insurance comes back, and we were estimating 1,200 and it's $5,000, right? That's a big difference, right?
Right. Joe, can you tell us a little bit more, based on your perspective, professional perspective? What do you see, and how is it going to affect all the first-time home buyer or upgrade buyer?
Well, I think it's interesting, right? Because again, I think the dissemination of information online is somewhat dangerous, because it's generally a clickbait type of environment. Oh, the rates went down. Well, the last 2 times the Fed lowered, mortgage rates actually increased. So what I look at generally is the 10-year Treasury bill, right? But what changed with this last meeting was, I think a dovish tone, where they have said they're now leaning toward easing, as opposed to, we'll wait and see. Now they're still going to wait and see. And the psychology has to change. And I think that's what this meant to me more than anything, was that the direction is down. So the number of sellers were the highest level in 8 years, okay? Which is a major piece of information, because the one thing that has been the stagnation has been no one wants to move, because they're sheltered in place essentially with a 3% mortgage, right? Now, if you're a first-time buyer and you were part of that time frame, it doesn't really matter to you what that rate was. You need to change your psychology now, and that affordability has changed dramatically from the 20-year highs, 25-year highs. So my feeling on the direction of rates is, certainly we'll see some easing. You went from high 7s, sometimes 8%, to mid to low 6s now, depending on the day.
So what I just heard you say to our sharing with our audience is they are different product for 20%, 10%, 3.5% down. They are different product out there. There is not just one cookie cutter for everyone.
No, because what happens if you're a first-time buyer and A, you don't have the money, or B, what if you find the perfect house that needs work, but if you exhaust all of your resources, let's say it's a 10% down buyer, and you exhaust all your resources for your down payment and closing costs, what happens? How do you repair it? a 20%
Correct.
credit card, right? So all these things go into it. And I think, look, I think the house in the end determines it. So generally what we do is I say, okay, I come to your door tomorrow and I say, give me all your money. What do you have? You tell me. And then we ratchet it back from there. Why do you do that? Why do you want to? I mean, we had someone that was going to liquidate a retirement account for their down payment, right? Right. When we looked at what the tax ramifications were, obviously I didn't do that. I had them look at a professional. But when you look at something like that, that's a game changer, right? A lot of buyers right now, or potential buyers, and I think this will be something that will happen, as interest rates go down, people that need to sell their house but need to get into the next house. There's, those people, vital to get pre-approved, because the initial reaction is, oh, I'll just get a bridge loan at some ridiculous expense, where there are ways that we can look at it and say, no, no, no. Like, for example, there are things called margin loans where you borrow against your stock. You can borrow against your 401k. You can take a liquidation and replace it in 60 days. There are a lot of things that you can look at to avoid a very costly expenditure. And that's what we do. And again, boring 30-year fixed. There's no premium for us giving advice because I've been doing this a long time, right? Because you'll see, as as I showed you with our pricing, like we declare our pricing up front, so we show you what our commission is, which is rare. I mean, we don't make what another mortgage person makes, because we try to do a lot of loans. But no, I think that initial consultation also gives you, as their consultant, as a realtor advisor, okay, here's what we can do. Here's where the amount is. And then, like I said, if a property needs work, maybe we didn't, and let's say it's a 20% down, maybe we opt for 10% down. Those type of things vary. And I think that's of primary importance. Primary importance.
Right.
I mean, I still honestly
And
have people that think they can't get a house unless they have 20% down. I have people that call me to get pre-approved, like, it's going to be another year. I'm like, you have 15% down. Like there's no reason that you need to wait. Right.
yep. Thanks. Where are we now for fall 2025?
Well, I think, the national average today was about 6.5. We're about an eighth to a quarter below national average. But the interesting thing, some of the FHA and VA loans are in the fives, right? So, there's been times where we've actually opted to go FHA our client to went FHA as opposed to conventional, because there are times that FHA, the interest rate plus the mortgage insurance, can be cheaper than the interest rate on a conventional, right? Again, why we want to talk to our mortgage professional prior to going and looking at properties. But, I think, I was very excited for the Fed to lower this time, because I had hope that mortgage rates would rally. And during that day, the 10-year Treasury, which mortgages are tied to, actually fell to about 4%, and then it popped up to about 4.15. So rates actually went up. But again, I mean, I think knowing that there are conversations of rate cuts in the future, it's wonderful. I remember there was a saying, and I might get it wrong, but it said, when was the best time to invest in Apple? Well, the best time was at the beginning. The second best time was today. I mean, Apple was not, just a stock.
Like it.
And I think that's real estate, right? You can't always regret not hitting the bottom, but once you take a look and if, why I'm excited is I actually have clients that are getting their offers accepted. And that has been something, so.
Thank you. Well, who you work with matter, guys. Well, we have the honor. We are going to put our information in the chat box so you guys can reach out to Joe and myself to set up your buyer consultation right away at no cost. Joe and I are here for all of you guys. We're excited for helping you guys making this new home or new dream and new goal happening to reality. So with that, I want to thank Joe today, and I want to thank everybody's time. And we will definitely see you guys soon.
Thank you. Thank you.